Perfect. So we're moving into the last conversation of today on future mobility. And I suppose it's an interesting conversation, Alan, that you and I are about to have as we go and look at how can improving connectivity in remote locations accelerate our journey to net zero. So I suppose a good place to start is, why are you talking about this?
Great question, Tabitha. I think, first of all, there's not a lot of people talking about this, so somebody has to talk about it. I think there's a big enabling ecosystem that needs to happen to support our journey to net zero. And one of those enabling backbones, if you want to say, we have finance, we have some key technologies that are helping us move to a better transport system, more energy efficient system. But underpinning a lot of that transition is some key enablers. So obviously you need the finance to be able to support the growth of the technologies, but connectivity, without connectivity, a lot of industries can't leverage the exciting digital technologies that essentially enables us to understand where the challenges are within a lot of the operations in businesses, in government, where the key data to allow us to understand where to make interventions is. And there's some really interesting trends at the moment within the space industry, within Internet of Things, within the digital ecosystem, such as in the cloud technologies and data analysis supported by AI technologies. And one of the things that I talk a lot about when I'm meeting with customers and with interested parties is that without access to the data, there's no way of getting the insights needed to make the right intervention. I think that is a key aspect of connectivity. If you take, for example, a rural industry, say an energy network, for example, that's a good one to use in the use case here, because it's they have a distributed asset set. They have they're distributed across wide geographic areas, and across those wide geographic areas, there tends to be areas where there's no cellular infrastructure, no power infrastructure, or not suitable infrastructure to be able to set up robust and reliable digital information systems that allows them to understand. So what essentially happens at the moment is that these large networks are quite interesting in that there's huge black spots in the data that's being provided into a business intelligence system, and that's purely down to the connectivity that's available. There'll be some assets that are in metropolitan areas where the connectivity, 3G, 4G, is completely accessible, and these assets can be digitized essentially, or automated data collection can be automated. That data can then go back to a central server where data analysis can be done. But across much of the network, the cellular infrastructure or the fiber network is not there, and therefore people need to be sent to collect this data. When you have to send someone to collect the data, it introduces issues into that data set. It's lagged, it's of low quality then. You're probably only collecting 1 or 2 bits of data per day because it's expensive to send someone to collect the data. And because of that, the overall quality of the data is low quality. So when you have a challenging industry where maybe they're producing a lot of carbon, and you don't have connectivity, Therefore, it's really difficult to understand exactly where to make that intervention. At the same time, if you have a large asset base, and there's lots of industries here in Scotland, but across the world, who have large asset bases across large geographic areas. When you have to send people to collect the data to understand what's going on that asset, whether it's performance, whether it's, then it's a huge cost, but also there's a huge carbon impact because you have to send someone to collect. We were working with a client not long ago, actually, who have operations in the north of Canada, and they have to send somebody in a helicopter every day to collect data. Now, when you have to send someone every day to collect data in a helicopter, that's a huge carbon resource. Now, the good thing is that actually a lot of these scenarios where you have these large assets spread over large amounts of area. The good news is that the technology now exists to be able to solve those issues, and that's really what we're doing at RFA IoT. There's a really interesting, I would call it a disruption. I hate the word disruption, but disruption happening in the space sector at the moment. Many of you will understand what's going on there, but Elon Musk is putting up a lot of satellites. So are another few other billionaires. They're putting up a lot of satellites. And what's happening, a lot of them are communication satellites with the intent to provide broadband technology to the globe, essentially. What's happening then is that the traditional satellite players are having to reduce costs. So there's a downward pressure on the cost of data, which means that data is now, satellite data and satellite technology is being democratized, so is being made available to industries that could previously not afford it. And on the sensor side, there's a lot of new sensor technology, Industry 4.0, which is the digitalization of industry and traditional industries. That people are starting to understand, and stakeholders are starting to understand the benefit of IoT and what IoT can bring to providing the insight into operations and where we can make interventions. And then on the cloud side, there's so much happening on the cloud side, data analysis, on the AI side, where we're able to take lots of different data sources and quickly understand what's going on and make the right interventions and suggest the right interventions that can be made. But it all comes back to, if you don't have the connectivity in place, it's very difficult to make those correct interventions. And with the space industry, what's really happening is that the technology now allows us to place our technology on a client site or on a let's go back to the energy network again. We can place the same piece of technology across this whole asset base, which means that the data is now made available to the business in real time or near real time. And that data is of a high quality, it's robust, it's reliable. You don't need to put in fibre up every single valley across Scotland at great cost and impact to the environment. You don't necessarily need to send somebody to collect the data anymore. And now the business can see what's actually happening on their business, in their business. And it means that they can be very efficient in how they target intervention, specifically from an environmental perspective, but also on a performance level for the business. And I think that's a great thing that's happening at the moment, and we are very excited about that.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that I've understood everything that you've said correctly. So while you were talking, you're talking about the connectivity issue with the data, and it was almost like, when you go out for a walk right? And you have a conversation and you miss gaps in the conversation, maybe with your mum and whatever else. This is what you're saying is happening with the data that we need to actually reduce carbon emissions. It's patchy, it's only coming in spots. You might go through a tunnel or whatever else on your walk or down into the woods and the data disappears. You know, so if you really want that good conversation with your mum, you actually have to go and drive to your mum's and sit down and have a cup of tea. But what you're saying is, actually, now that we've got the satellite systems up in the air, instead of actually having to go and make that trip to your mum, it's almost like, if you excuse the pun and the analogy, the Star Trek analogy comes into mind. It's almost like we've got good enough technology that you can actually teleport the data very quickly up through space down in, so that it's coming in, you're getting it, as you said, in real time. So it's kind of the same thing as live streaming. In terms of even like TV shows or whatever else, you can live stream the data, it's better quality, it's more reliable, and then people are actually getting the actual information that they need to make better decisions.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as that. If you can't get access to the data, then how are you supposed to make the right intervention? How can we optimize? How can we improve? Another good example is healthcare. And we're working with the Scottish Government on a project to help provide connectivity, and satellite connectivity specifically, but telecare services into the islands here in Scotland. It's an area that suffers from the fact that there's a digital divide, and digital divide is very simple, and you can understand it by from a business perspective. Here in centre of Glasgow, where I am today, there's lots of users, lots of cellular users. So it's easy to build a business case to put up a 5G or a 4G mast, because the BTs of the world will be able to get their money back really quickly. In rural parts of the country, it's a bit more challenging. You have to build the infrastructure. You have to make sure you've got the number of users. Therefore, it's much more difficult to make the business case to put a 4G mast up in Skye or in Shetland. Although you've got people out there who rely on digital services, the quality of those digital services are much poorer because of this. And the digital divide is there from a individual perspective, but also from an enterprise perspective, in that if you have a business which is operating in a rural environment, they're at an immediate disadvantage because of where they're located. And one of the things that we're trying to solve is that digital divide, and the fact that the technology is now available to solve that digital divide, which can have benefits on a community level, but also on an enterprise level and a government level, and specifically on the environmental side of things, is if you can accelerate the solving of this digital divide, we can also improve economies, so you can benefit rural communities, rural industries, but you can also help underpin or accelerate towards solving or getting close to the net zero aspect of the journey that we're going on.
Mm. So what I'm hearing you say there is it's really the big picture in terms of connectivity. It's almost like it's the missing conversation that we're not having, the gaps in between the data, because I'm listening to you talk, Alan, and I'm sitting thinking, right, so not are we only going to be getting better data, which allows us to measure our progress towards net zero more effective, but when we're talking about rural communities, businesses and communities there, you're giving them more connectivity. That means that people could be working from home, they could be cutting down the travelling distance, that then reduces carbon emissions. You could actually be putting better services in there. I mean, you mentioned healthcare as an example, and how do you provide high quality healthcare to rural areas when they don't have access? What's the online support that they need there in order to work? So there's a real multi-purpose benefit to actually increasing the connectivity.
Absolutely, it is, as you say, kind of the additional benefits that come with providing good connectivity is, there are many. Another example is kind of the different business models that you can implement when you have connectivity. So a good example is being able to implement predictive maintenance. So predictive maintenance, for example, on a rail network. In order to, one of the things that you do in the kind of maintenance aspect for a rail network is you send people to inspect assets or the rail infrastructure. And if you're in a rural part of the country, the only way to do that, where you don't have connectivity, is to send someone to do that inspection. Very manual, very costly. There's a lot of risk involved in that. And if you have ubiquitous connectivity, then you don't have to send someone to collect that information. And what you can do is use your resource pool much better, in that you can send individuals where there's actually a problem and not just go in to inspect all assets at all times, which is thing. So essentially what you can do is you can help these industries become smarter. They can use their resource much better. You can, as a consequence, you can reduce the carbon footprint of these industries, which is very exciting. And one of the reasons why we are doing what we're doing is that once the technology is in place, we can enable a lot of very exciting progress and have a lot of impact within quite a few different key industries.
So could you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're doing at R3IoT, just so that we can provide more context to the people who are listening in?
Yeah, not a problem. So previous to starting R3IoT, I worked at Clyde Space here in Glasgow. I was the head of missions, and Kevin Quillian, my business partner, he was the head of spacecraft design. So we come from the space industry. We realised that there was a lot of exciting development going on in the space industry at the time, but we felt that the way that the companies that were starting up, who were attracting a lot of investment, were going about it in the wrong way. That they were building out new satellite constellations, which was costly, quite inefficient, or capitally inefficient. And we felt that the best way to approach provision of remote IoT was to focus on the ground technology and focus on the cloud infrastructure, and be much closer to the user in terms of the end user, and actually solving real problems rather than building out new infrastructure and essentially build it and they will come type approach. And we felt that was a much better way to build our business. The other reason we chose to do that was that the technology, we were able to take the technology to market quicker, which meant we can essentially build our business quicker. We started in 2018. This year, we secured investment from a US VC, Scottish National Investment Bank, the University of Strathclyde, and a number of other investors from North America. And we're building out the technology we should be commercializing at the start of next year. We've been running a number of pilot programs with a number of key industries. I mentioned, the pilot that we have with the Scottish Government, and we've also got various other pilots with a few other industries, including the utilities. And we've had a project with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency as well. So the technology itself serves essentially as a digitization platform. It allows organizations to collect information from anywhere in the world, independent of local power infrastructure and local cellular infrastructure. A lot of people are getting very excited about that because it allows them to cover more of their, especially the industries that have these remote assets.
Mm. And I think what's quite powerful about what you've just said there is, you were working in the space industry and it was like, oh, we could go and we could keep on getting excited by the tech and going out and bigger into space. But, it was almost like, how do we look at the problems that are there and solve them and take very much a solutions-led focus into what we're doing? And it sounds as if it's really paying off.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that, Tabitha, I'm a technology. I was a physicist. I've been in technology all my career, and when we started the business, we didn't touch technology for 9 months before we actually started building technology. And the reason we did this because we felt that we had to look at the business case. We had to look at the challenges that our customers were facing, to identify the right approach for our business. So yeah, we've been very solutions led. We get right in about with our customers to understand their issues and their challenges, and then provide the technology that's best suited to solve those problems.
Yeah, I like that. You didn't touch technology for 9 months, Alan. So yeah. were you just doing studies and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big lessons for anyone that's starting a business that we found was that a lot of the questions around technology had already been answered. The biggest challenges were around, the market, what is the problem that we're going to be solving, where we're going to get the money and investment to build the business. So a lot of the kind of value proposition aspects of the business had to be developed before we could. We decided that we were in a good position to start building out. I guess building out technology is expensive, so you had to be very sure that it was the right approach to go down.
No, that makes sense. I'm just curious if there's any questions from the conversation so far, if I just open it up to the floor.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so you were talking a lot about like connectivity and like more connectivity, and that like it also generates more data, and about so like big data obviously uses a lot of energy, and there's a lot of energy demand, and that is like CO2 emissions. How can there be brought more sustainability into the servers, into big data on all those servers? Is there anything that you have any insight in, or anything?
It's a great question, Julia, and I think one of the things that still needs to be answered. I've seen some projects that have been started around using renewables as a main source of power for servers. I think we've still got a long way to go on that side of things. I guess the big thing that we can do as businesses that are using the server technologies is we can ask that the servers that we're using are powered by renewables, and we can put some pressure on the likes of Microsoft and AWS and such like. So I think that that will come. How quickly it shifts, I'm not sure. But yeah, we can continue to put some pressure on these big corporations to move into more renewable sources of energy. The other thing as well is actually one of the things that we do is that we actually optimize the amount of data that we send back to the cloud. So we actually do what's called edge processing of our data. We do that for a number of different reasons. And edge processing essentially is doing processing actually on the customer site using our own technology. And what that does is it cuts down the amount of data that actually is transferred back to the cloud via satellite. It reduces the cost and it also reduces the energy of the amount of, so it makes it a bit more efficient. So it's optimizing that data and really just sending the data that is required, if that makes sense. So that's we can use some smart algorithms to be able to do that. And that's really a useful thing, because a lot of our technology can be powered off renewables and completely independent of local power. So the more we can do that, the less of an energy requirement we have as a business.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I also have a question. Actually, I'm Juliet. This is Nina. Sorry,
Okay.
the name tag.
Sorry, no worries. Sorry.
So you mentioned that you were working with the Scottish government for healthcare with regards to bringing connectivity to the islands, and I was just wondering what other communities you've been working with, if you're working outside of Scotland as well, or if for now it's just Scotland based.
Yeah, great question, Julia, and get that one right this time. Yes, so at the moment, so the business is still quite young. We're 3 years old, so or just over 3 years now. So we're not operating extensively outside of the UK at the moment. We are looking to provide some initial services into Canada with some key partners. The projects that we're working on in Scotland primarily are focused on enterprise customers, but we do have a couple of projects, the one that we've mentioned on telecare, and we also have an emergency services contract, which is can't go into too much detail about that, but that essentially helps the emergency services essentially have more reliable connectivity through use of satellites, and that affects the whole of Scotland, in that having a much more reliable emergency services network, and these rural communities can still be afforded the same services that we have here in cities. So I think as the business grows, we'll start to see more opportunities to provide digital services into remote communities. I guess the other thing is a lot of the businesses that we are operating in are in rural areas, and therefore they're supporting rural jobs. And that's something that we're hoping to do. Is I think if rural jobs and rural industries, specifically rural industries, can be more competitive with industries that are based in or companies that are based in metropolitan areas. If we solve that digital divide, then they can be on the same footing as companies, which means that they're not going to go out of business to a company that's based in a city.
Great, thank you.
Excellent.
Respect, right in time.
Thank you very much for that. And I think, what was coming to mind listening to you is the potential impact of what you're doing is huge. So sort of, for example, I live at the foot of the Ochil Hills, and I'm sitting thinking about the mountain rescue services up there. And, my uncle said to me, never go up the hills without your phone so that rescue services can catch you. But if you're in a black spot and you've kind of decided to go off track and off route, then it makes it really difficult. And the more remote that you get, especially as you go up into the Cairngorms and other areas. So there's a real health and safety aspect of being able to save lives for people who are up already in rural areas. And there was even a story about this hermit that lives up near Loch Rannoch, and he's about to have a TV show created to him, but he's now in his 70s, and he left 26 years old. He decided to go, he built a log cabin, and he lives up on the loch. But at 79 years old, how do you actually have services that can check in there? And it's kind of coming back to that healthcare divide, or the healthcare issue that you're talking about. If you've got the connectivity there, you can actually have systems to check in on him so that, daily, I think what was being said is twice a week, the the local landowner comes up and gives them a food package. But through the technology that you've got, what we're basically saying is, and I know that this is really small scale, but you can amplify this out, especially if you move beyond Scotland. It's like you could be checking in on people there and then in the moment in their homes to actually find out what's going on. And then I suppose that, does this then even mean from there, it's like this could also help improve, warnings about extreme weather events and floods and things like that, because you'd be able to get the more accurate information. So actually we'd be able to mitigate some of the effects of climate change that are going to be happening in the near future.
Absolutely. That's exactly, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, Tabitha. I mean, these are all some of the really exciting use cases that can be enabled through solving this challenge. If you can collect, just imagine if you can collect data from anywhere, what are the mitigations that you can put in place? What are the additional services that you can provide? Your individual that you mentioned. If a GP could have access to that data in real time or near real time to see, provide an alarm to the doctor to say, this individual's not gone out his house today. His blood oxygen level is depleted slightly. What's happening here? Maybe we need to send someone not at the regular interval. Maybe we need to intervene here and send someone. It's a little bit like the preventative maintenance model, but on a human level, in that you are sending somebody to intervene because there's an issue. And I think that if the data is available, we can start to do that in the healthcare industry. The other thing that we became very aware of during COVID actually was helping the healthcare industry, send someone home after surgery. And one of the things that during COVID, a lot of the equipment that they were sending home with patients to help them breathe had some connectivity challenges, and they weren't able to send people home because of the fact that it was based on the cellular network. So certain places like in rural South Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire is actually quite rural in places. They weren't able to send some patients home, which meant that there was a pressure on beds within the healthcare system. So I guess if you start to enable that, if you solve some of those challenges, there can be other benefits that comes from that. I think healthcare is really interesting in that there's all this incredible advances on the sensor side, so the wearables and the amount of data that's collected from patients and in-home sensors, and there's a lot of really interesting companies even here in Scotland that are taking that data and feeding that data into the healthcare system, whether it's NHS, whether it's GPs, etc., whether it's social care services. But the key bit there, the key jigsaw piece is if you don't have connectivity. I keep saying this, but I'll continue to say, if you don't have connectivity, these services can't be enabled. You don't have the connectivity and the right connectivity and the connectivity that's reliable enough, then these services won't be able to be deployed at scale ubiquitously across the whole of the country. And I guess that's one of the things about the connectivity being an equalizer essentially, and will help us provide the same healthcare services, the same digital services for enterprise, whether you're based in a metropolitan area or you're in a rural area.
Yeah, and I'm just bringing it back towards even our 1.5 target, what we've got with the temperature. And I'm sitting thinking, I mean, this is the point of what you're saying here. If we need more reliable data, how do we know whether we're truly on target or not towards 1.5 if we don't have enough data? And how much could we end up potentially missing the target or achieving the target, but we don't know because we don't have that data gathered?
So I guess at the moment, it's changing all the time. But 90% of the planet doesn't have cellular connectivity, right? 90%, round about 90%. Connectivity tends to be focused in metropolitan areas, so your cellular networks around things. So if you think about that, yeah, there's a lot of water in those areas, but there's a lot of areas across the world where we have industry, quite carbon intensive industry, producing lots of carbon. And if you don't have connectivity in there, it's very difficult to understand how to make these interventions. At the moment, a lot of the reliance is on satellite Earth observation data and bits of in situ monitoring with expensive kit, and sending scientists to take measurements, etc. So I think one of the things that we have to do is as a community, as policymakers, is we have to solve that problem, is make sure we're getting as much of this data as possible to increase the quality, not necessarily relying on inference between models, etc. Is actually helping take in situ measurements, from areas where maybe we didn't have access before, to help provide better informed models. One of the projects that actually we have experience of this is we worked with the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. It was a flood monitoring use case, and they have a flood monitoring model. It's based on quite expensive gauging stations. They're quite environmentally impactful in that they're concrete structures placed on areas on key rivers around the country. And one of the challenges that they have is that these gauging stations need to be placed in areas where they have power and where they have connectivity. That's not necessarily where the scientists want to place the gauging station. They want the data from further up the river, further up the catchment, because that helps them provide more better warning, better models for the flood warning, which actually can save lives. And what we were doing was we took our system, we placed it high up in the catchment area where there was no cellular coverage. We used lots of low-cost sensors, and we worked with helping Scottish Environmental Protection Agency try and understand whether that approach would help them improve their modelling. We're also working with a company out in the US who are doing something very similar, and they are providing flood warnings into government agencies, which will help mitigate some of the challenges that we've got because of climate change.
Yeah, no, that's very exciting. I'm curious if there's any more questions coming in from the floor about what we're talking about just now.
You said that there is about a connectivity of about like only 10%. What do you think would be a level or a percentage that would be like, I guess, efficient, or like an effective one that like everyone is kind of connected, who wants to be connected, who needs to be connected? Because I assume some of that surface is also like water areas where there aren't any islands or no one really needs to. What would be a percentage that would be good to reach?
Well, I guess with satellite connectivity, you can achieve 100% connectivity. I think that's the key thing. So you can place the technology where you need it to be, essentially. So you can gather data, sensor data, and you can provide that connectivity where it needs to be. And I think that's the key thing, is that although the cities are one of the big carbon producing parts of our country, there are other areas which we need to address around, and they're not necessarily they don't necessarily have connectivity. So the good thing is that, you know, we can provide 100%. It's coming. The likes of Elon Musk with his Starlink constellation, OneWeb, there are a lot of others that are providing the types of service that's needed to gather all that data. On the back of that, there needs to be a way of us taking that technology and making it really easily accessible to enterprises, to communities, and also to governments, so that they can leverage this new technology, because it's a little bit like, you know, if you give someone the technology, but you don't give them a user manual. You give them a computer, but you don't give them a user manual. That's something that we need to do as well. So one of the things that we're doing with our business is trying to make it really easy for companies to leverage this technology and do the hard work for them, so that they don't have to assemble their own teams of digital experts and satellite experts and IoT experts. We are essentially acting as that integrator and that expert that allows them to deploy these mission critical services and use cases.
Okay, thanks.
So now I'm curious, I mean, what you just said there, Alan, is that we need to make the technology as really simple as possible so that more people can use it as quickly, you know, and the 100% connectivity is coming. So if we look to the future, I mean, how long do you think it's going to take us to have large scale deployment of connectivity through satellite technology to help us address these challenges that we're facing?
It's a great question. I think it's coming very quickly. It's actually coming quicker than I thought it would, and I think Elon Musk has got a lot to do with that, to be honest. But satellite technology is available. There's there's traditional satellite, which is much more expensive, but traditional satellite, we do have global coverage, so you can pick up satellite service wherever. I guess the key thing is the quality of the service. The increase in bandwidth that's available now across the world. When I started the business, or when we started the business in 2018, we expected that Elon Musk would have his Starlink constellation up and running maybe 2023, 2024, 2025. But as you all know, it's come much quicker than that. So I think that's something to be optimistic about, and that there's a bit of a space race which is happening at the moment. There is a space race which is happening at the moment on the connectivity side of things, because a lot of people see the value that the connectivity is going to bring, not only from an impact perspective, but also from a commercial perspective. I think that's a good thing in our fight against net zero. Fight to get us to net zero, sorry.
Yeah. I'm just sitting thinking about a conversation that we had on Friday with Robert Livingston, and what they do is they bring mobile cinema into rural communities around the world. And one of the things that they were talking about is, because they were saying this is, they're already zero emissions, they're bringing information into the community. But he was actually hypothesizing about the potential of live streaming community engagement in situ within a rural community to another rural community to facilitate conversation and dialogue. And it was interesting because it was kind of, I think from my understanding, we were talking about this is something that needs to be done. But from what I'm hearing you say is, now's the time to actually start exploring that, because the likelihood of that happening could happen really, really quickly. So how can you accelerate that connectivity and bring different communities from around the world? I think with Robert's point, it's like if you've got a community sitting in a local cinema, having an interaction with maybe a local community in, I don't know, Australia or Malawi or Indonesia, and then you're actually having a dialogue of how can we collaborate together in order to help my community benefit your community. I mean, now's the time to be thinking seriously about this.
Absolutely. I think it's something that when you're immersed in the industry, in technology side of things, you forget that a lot of the population don't know that the technology is actually available, and we're able to actually start to deploy these things now. I think we have essentially we have to go out and educate not only our enterprise customers and policymakers, etc., but we have to educate various communities out there to say, look, you don't necessarily need to be stuck with the connectivity that you have in place just now. There are better ways of doing this now, and it's becoming much more economical to be able to implement high quality connectivity, and then let everybody use that connectivity, to let's get creative with what we can do. I guess that's the good thing about what we've built is essentially a platform, and although we are going in to certain industries with certain product offerings, for example, helping SEPA reduce their flood risk, so we have to integrate river level sensors, etc. But essentially the core technology is a platform that enables companies, enterprises to build out whichever digital service they want on top of it. And when connectivity is there, I guess when the cellular network was first envisaged, I guess nobody could envisage all the different apps that were then placed upon your iPhone and enabled because of the cellular infrastructure. So I guess it's the same with satellite connectivity. Once connectivity is made available in rural parts of the world, you can start to do really interesting things. I guess that's an exciting bit of the journey as well, is that we're essentially that platform for rural industry, rural communities to then build upon.
Yeah. So there's another two conversations from the Future series that are kind of coming to mind. So when we opened the Future series, we had Val Munduruku, who is an Indigenous tribal leader from the Amazons, coming in, and she was talking about the challenges with logging, agroforestry projects and whatever else. And, we know that there's illegal logging and everything that's going on. And what you're saying is your technology could actually help Indigenous tribes support their local areas by building up a support system that could almost provide those early warnings for activities that are going on to actually help strengthen their communities and kind of fight back in terms of resistance. So that's one thing that's kind of coming to mind there. But then the other one as well, we had Joan Laurie from Thurso Community Development Trust on earlier today, and she was talking about the challenges that they're facing within Thurso because, they've got a nuclear power plant there, but it's getting decarbonised by 2030. They've got, they have to figure out how to involve that local community there and how to transfer jobs over, because she was saying the amount of people employed within Thurso is really huge. Especially linked to the nuclear power plant. And, they're the climate action hub for the whole of the Highlands and Islands. So it's almost like there's another conversation there as they kind of get up that you should be having with Joan as well on how can you actually support not just Thurso to evolve and, meet the challenges of the 21st century, but how you can also help them gather all the data that they need from the Highlands and Islands to help support the climate action that they're engaging with.
Absolutely. We've one of our pilots was up in Shetland, and that was very successful. But that was in an area where there was challenging environment, and I think the quicker that we can enable these rural communities by getting them the technology that they need and allowing them to build out the services that they need, the better.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. No, well, thank you very much for your time today, Alan. I mean, this has been really, really helpful to get a sense of exactly where we are with connectivity and the potential. I mean, I think my mind is just not quite blown. It's not blown, but I would say here's a better example. I think my mind is sparking with the potential connectivity that could be created, and I'm just going, holy crap! I mean, what is possible in terms of the next evolution? And I think this is something that is really another reason to be optimistic as we move towards our net zero targets, because of the potential that could happen as you're kind of deploying this and reaching it to scale. So I'm just really grateful that you've come along to the Future series today to tell us more about this.
Thank you, Tabitha. Thanks for everyone for kind of inviting us along so we can talk about it. As I said at the start, I think it's a part of the solution. We're not the solution. We're part of the solution. We're an enabler. Connectivity is an enabler for delivering the kind of insight that allows companies, governments, policymakers, etc., to make the interventions and make the right interventions. And as I said at the start, it's we have this data access problem at the moment, and if we can solve that, then it'll help us in our journey to net zero.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Alan.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Thank you.